I think I did that on both episodes. I was like, oh, we'll catch you next week, and then said something else, and we'll catch you next week. And I do that so much.
Next week is when we'll catch you.
I do it on the Save It for the Cast even. I'm like, how can I repeat myself in like a 5-minute segment? Jesus
Hey, we turned 2 segments into a good hour there.
Oh, yeah, way longer than the first one, yeah. I was like, man, I definitely don't need to talk about this other stuff.
No.
I could have even kept going on the Apple Arcade. I feel like there's even other games I just couldn't think of off the top of my head. But
I know. I dabbled in like the Crossy Road stuff that's on there, and
I was gonna say
things like that.
Did the game ever come to you that you were trying to think of before?
I think it was just the Pocket Card Jockey stuff. Even though I don't know, I'm just tired brain. Even though I'm 3 hours earlier than you, it's just,
hey, even that Crossy Road is fun, man.
Yeah,
it is an addictive game.
Well done.
And after when we talked about Pac-Man 256, I think that's the same studio.
Yeah, it is.
And you can tell that somebody was just like, hey, these, like, what if there was a Pac-Man game like Crossy Road?
It turns out it's awesome.
It's fantastic. And Crossy Road was I remember downloading that on my iPhone and just being addicted, even just like with the swipe gameplay.
Yeah.
Very fun game. Hey everybody, welcome to Pursuing Pixels. My name's Kevin Portelli, and I'm here tonight with Randall Nolery.
Hey folks.
And we are back as always to talk about some video games, and just the two of us again this week, but we got plenty to talk about per usual. And John should be back with us soon. He's just had a hectic couple of weeks, but I always feel like, hey, we got to let, DJ just disappeared on us after a while. We got to be, hey, John's still here, guys. So
no, we're not letting John escape. No chance.
I know.
I'm not letting it happen.
I know he brings too much good stuff to the table, man. And speaking of, like, half the time we're like, hey, we got to make sure we take you. Like, I know you've still been playing some Metroid Zero Mission.
Oh yeah.
It's like, hey, we gotta table that till John's around.
Yes.
Like, it's almost
100%.
like
RPGs. That
RPGs
is saved for John.
Yeah, RPGs or Metroidvanias come up. Like, John's got to be around for that. So we'll save some of that stuff for later. But I do know that kind of unexpectedly, Randall in the Discord was like, hey, by the way, I've been dabbling around with some Apple Arcade games recently. And I didn't even know that you had signed up. So I'm kind of curious, like, what prompted this decision? Because I know, like, when Apple Arcade first launched, I think I know a game that we've both raved about right off the bat was Sayonara Wild Hearts. We didn't play it on Apple Arcade. I think we waited till it came to other platforms.
Yes.
And then we're like, oh, this game's amazing. But that was one that I knew, like, right from day one. I was like, oh, I wish I had Apple Arcade. Maybe I'll sign up for the trial so I can try that game out. And there were a handful of others. And I kind of, since then, it's been seemingly pretty quiet, although, right before we started recording, we were looking up a list like, oh shit, this is on there, this is on there. Like, tons of games, like, beyond the ones that I even knew about. So, and definitely not all exclusives to Apple Arcade, although some of these are, they started maybe for the first year or so. But yeah, what kind of prompted you going this route?
Yeah, so, Tina and I have been, like, watching a lot of shows on our, like, downstairs TV, and I've, like, been kind of searching for an elegant solution because, we got this OLED TV, like, basically when our daughter was born, like, 4+ years back. But 4+ years back in electronics years means dinosaur pretty quickly.
Right.
So then, like, some of the streaming apps weren't getting, like, up-to-date features and were starting to be a bit clunky. And when we're trying to, this is a 4K TV, so, like, this is 4K streaming even. So it's, like, even more bandwidth that it needs. And if it's not hitting those numbers, even with our pretty decent internet, then it starts getting choppy, and the apps are taking longer to load, and going through the menus starts getting a little sloggy, and it's just like So then, for a while, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I can attest, like, being back at home, like, my parents, I don't know how old their TV is, but whenever they're like, and they, like, talk to the remote all the time, and it doesn't even register when they push the button. It's like everything is so laggy when they're like, hey, can you help me with this? I'm like, you guys just got to go in the other room and let me figure it out, because like I cannot stand how slow this works, and I need to just like do it without anybody bothering me. But I definitely know that laggy feeling of frustration. So so
and we are all tech support for our families, of course.
Yeah, yes. Exactly.
Obviously.
So I totally feel you. Like we gotta remedy this situation before it gets any worse.
Yeah. So then I was like, oh well, I got this new Xbox Series X, and there was a good practically a year where okay, that's the streaming box now. I'll put everything on there, and but then there was still like a couple of streaming services that like either the app wasn't on there or it seemed kind of out of date. And then on top of that, it's kind of overkill to use something that's such an energy hog as like the Xbox to just stream TV, right? And I'm like, well, okay.
And can you talk to the Xbox, or can you like do you have to like get out a controller to navigate the menus?
So actually, the nice part there about Xbox is I've been using a Harmony remote for over a decade.
Okay. Yeah.
They're compatible with the Harmony remote, so I could still control the Xbox through that Harmony remote, turn it off and on, and go through the menus and stuff. So it wasn't too bad that way, even though sometimes it's still even faster to use a controller.
Yeah. But I always know, like, I used to use my PS3 as like my and 4 as like my main like Blu-ray player, DVD, and it's like it was kind of annoying to be like, especially if I like had a movie night at my place, like, oh, you don't know how to use a game controller, you don't know how to control the movie. It's just like, I don't know, it would be kind of annoying. Like, I always had to be the one controlling it. I couldn't just be, grab the remote, hit pause to somebody who had it right next to them.
The tangent time, that goddamn PlayStation controllers and those fucking shoulders where, like,
yes,
thank you. There's these little, like, and I still think the PlayStation controller shoulder buttons feel kind of flimsy, the triggers.
Yeah, and then they do. They're like, so they almost feel like they're going to snap off. Yeah.
Yes. And then like you're watching a show and it's like the rewind button or whatever. And it's like, no, whatever it was that like it all, like that happened to me all the time.
Yep. The fast forward. And it's like, if it's on any surface that's not perfect, basically if it just moves the way they're like angled, they're just meant to get pushed in. Like they automatically get pushed in if the controller moves at all.
Yes.
Yeah, that definitely has happened many, many a time.
Yes. So all that to say that, I'm like, okay, am I going to delve into the devilish world of Apple here? It's been, I last bought that iMac. That was like the last major Apple purchase that I made back around 2010, 2011 or whatever.
Right.
Long time. So, and I had been kind of out of that world, had kind of bad experiences with iPhones, whatever. Just hadn't bought a lot of that stuff for a while. But then I'm like, okay, best streaming box seems like it's the Apple TV. Plus, it's got this other stuff that I could dabble around with this Apple Arcade that I've kind of had eyes at from afar for a while now. Okay.
Yeah.
And I can get it while it's on this sale to get this latest version. That'll be my streaming box. It seems like that's the best in class streaming box, whatever. Okay, cool. Fine. I'll do that. I'll buy that thing. Have had a really good experience streaming on that as an aside. So that's kind of become the go-to.
It is a slick interface. Just everything's nice. The remote's, pretty handy.
Yes.
It's just it's a nice piece of machinery for sure. Even just like the UI, all that stuff is. My buddy had a. And again, this is years and years old, but our buddy Mikey, who we've talked about on the podcast many times, in John and I's band, like he had Apple TV when we would watch stuff over there, and I was always like, man, I want to get one of these. Every time he used it, I was like, I kind of want one of those.
Yeah.
And this is long before Apple Arcade was a thing.
Yes, pretty sleek stuff, and happy to have it just for that alone. But then I'm like, but it's got this Apple Arcade, and it's got a 3-month free trial because I bought this Apple TV. So, hey, even better. So then I did that. And then I'm like, I can use my PS4 controller, and I don't even have a PS4 anymore.
I was just going to ask.
So I did that, but then, another weird aside is I had to go down this rabbit hole because I was noticing lag. It's a Bluetooth connection through that, but I was noticing like just input lag issues. And then on research, people kept pointing to like, oh no, if you're using an unshielded HDMI cable, you might encounter lag. What the hell is that? What do you mean? Like from the HDMI cable? How?
Yeah.
And then I'm, of course, so now I'm back in my land of the TV input cable, superiority stuff, of course. So then I, on research, like, oh, okay, this like Belkin cable that they recommend for Apple TV and is sold on the Apple Store, but I can get it, from Amazon or wherever else for a little bit cheaper, is shielded. All right. Well, people say that works, which is just crazy to me. Like, how is that causing input lag, whatever?
Just some kind of interference or something?
Interference.
But I still don't know how that would cause lag.
I think it is. I think it's an interference because it's not a shielded cable. So I bought it.
Yeah, like the Wi-Fi signals are somehow, I don't know, slowing it down. I don't know.
Yeah, and even in the interim, so this was all during like the holiday period, and there was a lot of controllers on sale, and then I had some gift cards, and I noticed that, the PS5 controller is on discount, and it is like the go-to Apple TV controller, and I love hardware. Like, oh geez, okay, sure, all right, let's give that a go. Maybe that'll solve my issues. It didn't, but I still had it when I bought this stupid HDMI cable. Replaced that. And it freaking worked. I don't know why. Now I have no input lag. The HDMI cable, the shielded HDMI cable solved it. So all that to say, I end up with this Apple TV experience with a PS5 controller now.
How is that controller, by the way?
It's nice. I still am not a huge fan of the triggers on PlayStation controllers, though, if I'm being perfectly honest.
It's between that and as much as we've talked about our 8BitDo SN30 Pros and stuff. And as much as I like that controller, And it probably feels a little better than at least the older PlayStation controllers. I haven't felt the 5. But I do think having those two joysticks in the center as opposed to being kind of offset like they are on all the other controllers, it leads to a little more cramping for me.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Over time, like just keeping my thumbs kind of out there like that. Like it just, I don't know, the grip is a little less, I don't know if natural is the right word, but I don't cramp up the same way when I have like a Switch Pro controller in my hand or an Xbox controller.
I agree. And even though I can respect, like, oh, cool, you kind of put this like pretty big D-pad in kind of a primary position. I kind of like that from one perspective. But then, even then, it's not my favorite D-pad that I would want.
I was going to say that split kind of weird D-pad, although it does feel decent because I used to play a lot of like retro-ish inspired games on my PS3. And as much as I was like, I didn't expect this to work as good. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Playing like the old PS1 classics on there.
Yeah, so like it works for that, and ultimately the build of the controller is pretty good. I like it for that. It feels pretty nice, but I still don't necessarily prefer it to, say, the new Xbox Series controller or the Switch Pro controller. Ultimately, I would say. Yeah. But glad to have it for this. It does feel really nice. It's seamless with the Apple TV and the Apple Arcade experience, which is the main thing we're here to talk about. So got into Apple Arcade, finally got no input lags, kind of had a false start or two with like just trying to get into some of these games because of all that stuff, but then did. But then I did play, I just like, Sayonara, Wild Hearts is here. Why not play through it again? Because it's phenomenal. And
so that's one that if you start that game, you're finishing.
Exactly.
There's no option.
Yeah. And I did, of course. And, before I was like just trying my best to even get bronze with like the setup before with the interference. And I even tried to use like the Apple remote to play it. And that was more successful than using a PS4 controller with that old setup. But I'm like, no, I can't. This is brutal to try to play with a literal TV remote. Yeah,
for certain, get like a puzzle grid game, sure, it might work. But yeah, that seems a little bit much for Sayonara.
So then when I finally got, no lag PS5 controller, I'm like, okay, I was like getting silvers like on average, which is not an easy thing to do.
It's not, especially on some of those like shorter levels. They're like impossible. Like, man, if you don't get in the zone with like that pattern, you just miss everything.
Yes. So I'm like, oh no, this is just a brilliant experience yet again. We'll talk about it for the 8 millionth time on this podcast.
Yeah, it's one of the best games ever made. It's just best experiences.
Experiences, yes. Yeah. Experiences. It's brilliant. It's totally brilliant.
It's a masterpiece, yeah.
It is. Played through that, and then I dabbled in a little bit of like Cooking Mama. There's a Cooking Mama game on there. Like,
nice.
There's a lot of DNA from that like DS era that kind of flowed into the kind of smartphone era, right? So a lot of those sort of games like Cooking Mama, went over there, or a lot of like the puzzler games went over kind of in that direction afterwards too. We're going to talk a little Grindstone in a second as well. That sort of game became more of like a tablet or, iOS, Android sort of experience over time.
Like touchscreen optimized almost. Yeah.
So dabbled in that. That's still Cooking Mama. We actually ended up just bought like a crap ton of hardware in preparation for this travel we're going to have to Michigan too, where, we're like, okay, Fiona's going on 4.5 here. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea to have like a tablet. So we ended up getting an iPad too after trying to go cheap the first time. And it was like a really bad experience with kind of a cheaper tablet. I'm like, okay, fine. Refund that, use the difference in money. Let's get an iPad because we're this far in and we have the Apple
household now, baby. You got to put the sticker on the windshield.
God. No.
No, but sometimes their stuff is nice. Like it's expensive, it's overpriced. You can get better stuff for your money sometimes, but sometimes it's like, man, the iPad is kind of just nice. Or
it is. It's very well engineered.
It's a slick machine. Yeah,
it is. So then, like, Cookie Mama and Tina got into it on the iPad too, and then one of the big things on Apple Arcade, both on the Apple TV and the iPad, just released is Pocket Card Jockey Right On.
Oh,
Pocket Card Jockey.
I've seen that. Yeah,
straight up one of the best 3DS games. I will say that unequivocally.
Okay,
Pocket Card Jockey, made by Game Freak.
I was going to say, I was like, it's not Nintendo, but it's like Nintendo affiliated, sort of. Okay. And this one is Game Freak as well?
Yep. So
man.
It's Pocket Card Jockey is phenomenal. Just solitaire. It is, I don't know. What would you say? Like, did you play Pocket Card Jockey? Actually,
I don't think so. Was there a version of it on the 64 as well that never came to North America?
No, you're thinking of Animal
some kind
Crossing.
of horse race. Okay, I thought I remember there being some kind of horse racing game.
Oh, there might have been
on the 64, but I'm assuming this is some kind of card game as well, based on the name and the solitaire mentioned.
Yeah, so take like horse racing with solitaire and but not just the horse racing, but the whole experience of horse breeding and
okay,
and even in some senses kind of it's a little bit of words.
Well, like what you're describing is almost like more of like a sim game, and so almost like the My GM mode of NBA, like you're talking about. Oh, you got to breed the horses in the background or whatever. Because I was picturing more like.
But there's a random element to it per run. So it's kind of like what's
roguelike-y or
it's
permadeath-y. Yeah.
Yes.
Or randomly generated. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. There's almost a roguelike run element to the horses that are available to you and what they can achieve based on your play. And you can, and then you're breeding two successful horses together to make mega horses that can then win things. But each segment of the race is broken up into playing these random solitaire hands or partial solitaire games basically too. And you're split second success and how you're playing solitaire with these extra elements thrown in. It's brilliant. Tina's been playing it mostly. So there's some elements of that game that are a little hazy to me because I mostly played it on 3DS back closer to 10 years ago by now. But oh my God, I loved that game. I was so addicted to Pocket Card Jockey.
That sounds really cool because I was almost picturing more of a that game at the carnival where you're you have to roll the balls into the holes and it makes the horse move. I was almost picturing arcadey mechanics like that.
It's not that far off in a sense. Yeah.
But it's just solitaire mechanics as opposed to arcadey, bouncy balls or whatever.
Exactly. You're horse racing, but you're not riding a horse. You're doing this other action to propel your horse forward and jockey amongst other horses.
And the fact that you're saying it's kind of a little more run and randomly generated, kind of that's speaking my language, very much so.
And there's a lot of cool, cutesy story elements. It's all 2D even a little bit like Paper Mario-ish as far as like the 2D presentation of it, I would say. It's cool. And it doesn't take itself seriously. It's very like Japanese developed. And it's a very well-made thing, and I'm glad they ported it out of what's now a very dying platform.
So it is virtually the same game with maybe a
from
couple
everything
new
I can tell.
or...
Yeah, they call it now like Pocket Card Jockey Ride On, where it didn't have the Ride On part before. But from watching Tina play it on the iPad, I can't necessarily see that many glaring differences, which is a good thing because God, it was just a fantastic game on 3DS.
Yeah, that's one that like maybe I've heard the name in passing, but I definitely wasn't even on my radar. Like, I should check that game out. So
yeah, that would have been
either the Apple Arcade or the 3DS regard.
Pre-podcast sort of Randall gaming experience there, where I just went hog on that for way too long.
Hey, sometimes when the right handheld game like just hits you just right, like I can't even tell you how many hours I played of Yoshi Touch and Go on the DS, and I don't even think that kind of had a roguelike element too. Like every time you played a run, it would be a randomly generated version of the level.
Yeah,
and it just like I didn't even know it at the time, but yeah, I guess I was sort of like that was sort of my introduction to procedural generation anyways. I guess it wasn't a roguelike per se, but
yeah, which, hey, if depending on when this episode comes out, I suppose, but like the opportunity to buy things off of the 3DS and Wii U eShops is
going away.
very, very close to going away at this point. I think it's a matter of a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's very, very, it's this year for sure.
Yes.
Early this year.
Yes. So like there is all of that, but God, Pocket Card Jockey's amazing. But yeah, I also dabbled in Shovel Knight Dig. I did play that a little bit. Yeah,
I'm dying to. I've looked at it on Switch so many times, like that, and I think it's called Pocket Dungeon, Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon
I haven't
or something.
Played that one yet.
They both look awesome, and they both I think have roguelike elements as well, or at least again that randomly generated situation. But yeah, when they announced Shovel Knight Dig, I remember they were like, we basically just want to make like Shovel Knight meets Downwell, and I was like, excuse me? Like, yes, please. And I think isn't that the one that Nitrome worked on as well? So like
I think so.
I know they worked on one of the two of those games, and I'm just like, they kill it. Shovel Knight already has amazing pixel art as is, but Nitrome just goes hog. Bomb Chicken is the game that comes to mind immediately, like just that has amazing pixel art from them. But they've done a ton of really cool looking games. But yeah.
Oh yeah. So the Shovel Knight Dig, it's cool. I don't know that it didn't fully grab me, I guess I would say so far. But I've only fired it up a couple of times. But it's got kind of more of that kind of like Dig Dug sort of DNA to it to some degree, I guess, with Shovel Knight, where you're still collecting the gems and there's a lot of the same familiar enemies and stuff.
Yeah.
So far, I'd say I'd still prefer kind of the traditional Shovel Knight like action platformer gameplay approach as opposed to the way that they've got it here. And I don't even know if I can put my finger on what feels so different that it's not grabbing me, because I kind of like Dig Dug too, for what that's worth.
Yeah, that's a cool arcade game, yeah.
But so far it has not like sucked me in the way that like a Pocket Card Jockey or a Sayonara or the other game that I also want to talk to you about, Grindstone, has.
Yeah, definitely. I've been really, really sucked into that one. That's another game that I picked up on my Switch when I was got my Christmas gift cards. I had about $40. I've mentioned this a couple times now, but I was like going through looking at the games on sale. And as much as I actually kind of had forgotten about Grindstone, it was on my radar because it had come out on Apple Arcade, and I was like, oh man, that's the new game from Cappy or Capybara Games, like who have made some of my favorite games. Critter Crunch, one of my favorite puzzle games I've ever made. Might and Magic, Clash of Heroes, one of the best puzzle games ever made. Game. They've also worked on, I haven't played this, and I have this on my Switch as well, which I fired up for like 2 seconds the other day just because like I've never played Super Brothers, and I had Cappy on the mind, but that Swords and Sorcery EP or whatever the heck that game is called. I don't think were the only ones that developed. Like they kind of like partnered with another like solo developer or something. It was. I think it was actually like an iOS game, like a really early like iPhone game. It came out on a bunch of other platforms too.
Yeah.
Like Super Brothers. I forget exactly what it's called, but a really cool like kind of unique game. But again, yeah, Critter Crunch, one of my favorite puzzle games ever made. Like. And so again, as soon as I saw, okay, Cappy, because they had that other game on Xbox, maybe it came elsewhere, but I know it was an Xbox exclusive originally called Below that looked really interesting. I think it was another kind of survival roguelike situation. I don't know exactly what it was like. It looked interesting.
Magic game's good though. That game's really good too, and that came out on Xbox and one of the DSs as well, I want to say. Oh, yeah, they did put that out on DS, I think. I had it on PS3 downloadable, and me and my old roommate, when DJ and I lived together, our other roommate and I would just play the versus mode. Nice.
Nonstop. It was so fun, especially, playing again. The campaign was really fun, too, but, like, playing against somebody where you were, like, really, it was like chess, you know? Like, it's so, the mechanics are just so cool. So, like, as soon as I saw, okay, Cappy, one of my favorite puzzle studios in general, is making a new game.
Wow.
They got Grindstone, and it's got like that really just vibrant, like kind of hand-drawn art style, really vibrant colors. Like
feels very alive. Yeah, it's really cool.
Even though like at the most part you're kind of looking at like a Bejeweled-esque, puzzle grid of tiles or whatever, or in this case enemies. And John's talked about this game on the podcast long ago. Back when he first played it. But yeah, again, I picked it up on Switch on sale because I was like, I half finished this thought, but the reason that it popped into my mind again was when I was at Best Buy looking for Christmas gifts. I saw that they had the Grindstone physical copy there, and that's what just made me, I totally forgot about that game after it, because I was like, it's on Apple Arcade. I can't play it right now. So I kind of let it slip my mind. Yeah. But as much as I was like, I do love collecting stuff, but it's $35 for the physical copy, and I'm like, man, it was on sale for $9, and I was like, this is one of those games I know I'm going to play it way more if it's just sitting on my system. And I'm especially glad I picked it up that way, because part of me, I remember when John talked about it, he kind of framed it like, it is kind of like there is a campaign sort of, and like there is, you do play and you are progressing, you're beating like stages, but there's like these daily challenge things. There's like 3 different modes that you can play. There's sort of like 3 different like goal, like one, you're just trying to get as much loot as you want. Like I forget what the different kind of modes are, but they're just kind of like, here's these 3 daily challenges. So it very much like if I end up like beating the game and going, I wish there was more, there is more, it very much, if you're into the mechanics, there is like the daily mode is just as good as playing the game, other than you're just not, progressing and learning the new mechanics. So I only dabbled with that a little bit because they were throwing new mechanics at me that I hadn't seen yet. So I was like, I probably should learn that in the game before I just like have any, I don't have any clue how to interact with this like enemy or this like box or item or whatever. So,
right.
But I will say I've played like maybe 8-10 levels so far, which probably isn't a ton of progress, but I'm just loving every single element of the game. I think I mentioned it briefly on, I'll save it for the cast, or even when we talked about it briefly with John, or maybe just off when we were recording off the air. But like, I really like how the gameplay feels a lot like Sushi Striker. Did you ever play that game?
Yeah.
It's less frantic because you do just have pretty much as much time as you want to make the best possible
which is
move.
Nice.
You can make, it's definitely nice to take that frantic element away, as much as that was a cool part of Sushi Striker. But because I had that kind of like control scheme in mind already, it works really well, and I'm sure it works quite well. Actually, I played it a little bit on touchscreen with the Switch, just kind of dragging and over the creeps, and it works really well for that. I bet too. The creeps are just the enemy types, but I really like how you're basically just able to chain as many enemies together as you can of the same color, whether it's diagonally,
diagonal too.
Horizontally, you can kind of like almost like crisscross over one another, because you can really be like, okay, if I go, you can really fine tune your path and make sure, I could get like 5 more creeps or enemies if I go this way, and like kind of take the roundabout way here, and then there'll be gems that you unlock if you get a big enough combo that lets you chain then 2 different color creatures together. And that's when things just really start opening up. You're like, oh man, if I can get big enough combos, I can just spread this whole map full of gems.
Yep.
And then I'm just clearing the board. And then like John talked about before on the podcast, like there's that risk reward element of like, okay, I've cleared the stage, but I can keep trying to get more gems and more loot and whatever. only at the risk of the stage getting harder and harder as I stick around.
Right. As more of the enemies turn into the type of enemies that'll attack you if you are right next to them in some way.
Yeah, if you don't land on a safe space, like it gets to the point where if you stick around too long, like there are no safe spaces, like unless you can take out, all the enemies in the surrounding area. So
right.
How far have you made it into the game so far?
Oh gosh, only 3 or 4 levels. This is something I played like a couple of nights ago for the first time, and I'm like, oh sheesh, like why didn't I pop this on earlier? And it even like floated out of my brain that this was something that was actively talked about on the podcast.
Yeah, kind of me too. Yeah,
I certainly heard the name of it, both obviously from the podcast, and you had mentioned it and John had mentioned it, and just in general, I was aware of it, but like I'm like, oh no, I should have been playing this before. This is fantastic. I just love how it feels. I love the presentation. How seamless it is. Yeah, the music is awesome too.
All the like shop mechanics that like sometimes can feel a little bit grindy in those types of games, but the way they've structured the campaign, at least so far, again, I'm not very far in either, maybe just a little further than you, 6, 7 stages, no more than 10 at the most. But it just feels like very like I'm unlocking things at a good clip. They're not like just overwhelming you with a bunch of mechanics, but they're not like taking too long to where like, oh, this game's getting boring.
Right.
Or they're parsing this out like just to stretch the game out longer. Like I always get that fear with puzzle games that are like have a campaign to them. I'm like, does it need that? Can it just be an arcade high score chasing situation, But
right.
I don't know. I feel like this works really, really well, especially with that added like daily challenge mode where you have 3 different modes to go for high scores and truly just try to chase the leaderboards and stuff.
I'm going to have to check that out too, for sure. I would be very into the daily challenge on something like that, where it's just like, do this quick puzzle, basically this like action puzzle.
Yeah. Cause it's another game where it's like, it's totally turn-based, take as much time as you want, but it really feels actiony. Like every time you click and like execute a move, you're like, holy, it just feels like an arcade game.
In
the best way. Like it's just so, every animation is so juicy and crisp. The sound design, the music.
Yeah.
The music was a little different than I expected, because I do remember when the game came out, everybody was like, oh my God, the soundtrack's insane. It's so good. And I really enjoy it, but it didn't catch my attention as much as like I remember people going like nuts.
Yeah.
I nothing against it whatsoever, but I was just like, I expected it to be like, oh man, I'm gonna have to put that on Spotify playlist or something. And I was like, it's cool while I play the game, but I don't feel compelled to throw it on beyond that. But
yeah. I like it. From what I remember of playing it, I like the music quite a bit.
Yeah. I definitely don't mean anything negative towards it at all. I definitely enjoy that. And actually, it's the game that I was actually hoping that you had maybe played was What the Golf. Have you heard of that game?
I've heard of it. I have not played it yet.
It's another one that eventually, it might have even come to Apple Arcade and Switch at the same time. It might not have been like an exclusive thing, but it's just been one that's like, I think it's $20 or $25 or whatever it is, full price. It's just one that I haven't seen on sale or just haven't like, bit the bullet and bought it yet, but it just looks so cool and unique and just kind of like almost like a WarioWare-esque take on golf. It just looks very bizarre and unique. So I was like, I wonder if Randall's played that. And I saw it when we were looking up.
Yeah, hits a lot of my buttons. So that seems, mentioning those sort of things like video game golf and WarioWare. Yeah, that seems like something that I should be just installing because I have the subscription. So I will be doing that 100%.
Yeah, it's one that if you do, that'll put me over the hump and just I probably should just grab it on Switch.
Yeah.
And then, we were looking up the list of games beforehand, trying to remember what you were trying to think of. I was like, I saw there's a Choo Choo Rocket game.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that was the thing too, because that was a launch one. And I was like, oh shit, they made another Choo Choo Rocket. Like, so I need to play that too. And I had forgotten that was a thing too until I looked at the list.
Yeah, they really brought out the big hitters for the that launch, especially.
Yeah. At least for folks like us, I don't know how widespread Choo Choo Rocket is known, but for our sort of circles.
But still, like to think like, oh man, they got like a Sega game, or like I don't know what they had to do to get to make that happen, but
right.
I don't know, just not necessarily what I would expect, and also not what I would expect. A game that I actually checked out not through Apple Arcade recently, but I checked out I don't know if it's the most recent. I think it's the second most recent game from Sokpop. And I think I might have even mentioned this briefly on a Save It for the Cast, but it's called Wurdweb.
Yeah.
And this is also originally an Apple Arcade game. Like they just kind of launched it, like they made an announcement like, hey, this game's going to be delayed that they were currently working on. And then all of a sudden they were like, oh, our new game's out. And I was like, wait, I thought they said it was going to be delayed. But they were like, oh, they made Wurdweb available now that it's not an Apple Arcade exclusive. So I don't know what the time frame was there. But really cool game. I ended up playing it on a stream, and it's essentially like a Scrabble type board, like very, very Scrabble-esque. I was sort of expecting when I saw like, oh, a word game, it's probably going to be like a Wordle inspired thing, but it's very much like a Scrabble board. Hey, but instead of getting like a bank of tiles, like letters to use, you actually get like a bank of words that you can use. And then you have to like just make sure that like, okay, where will this word cross? I got to make sure that I can use I've got 5 words I can use, and I got to connect it to these words here. And there'll be like a series of challenges that are like, okay, you just have to get a certain amount of points to beat this stage. It's almost like challenges. It's like a single player game. There might be multiplayer modes, but all I've been able to play is a single player. But it seems to like kind of load in like words from the internet somehow. Like it connects to, or maybe they just have some massive database, but I think it does like pull in stuff because there is like daily challenges and whatever.
Jeez.
But then they have other challenges like where it's like, you do have to, the gameplay mechanics are the same, but you have to actually like, instead of getting a certain number of points or playing a certain number of words, you have to like, there's almost like a finish line tile. And it's like, you have to make sure that you play words in a certain way where you'll pass through that finish line in a certain number of words, like given, okay, I only have these 3 words to work with. I got to make sure that my final word goes through, or maybe it doesn't even need to be the final, but just that I can connect words together and touch that tile. At first, I thought it had to be the last tile of the word. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be so impossible. But you just have to touch it. Like make sure that your final word is touching that like finish line tile.
Okay.
And then you just kind of like clear challenges, and then it unlocks new ones. And I only played maybe about an hour of it on a stream, but it was like perfect. Like I had played something a little more action-y before that.
Right.
And was like, oh, let me switch over to something else. I think I was just playing some Sokpop games. And I was just like, oh, this will be perfect. I'm kind of, my back was starting to hurt. So I'm like, I can just kind of lean back, play with the mouse. And I think you can play with the gamepad as well. But it just felt nice to like, oh, let me just grab the word from the, bank off to the left and drop it on the menu. Right click to, rotate it horizontal or vertical. Took just a little bit of getting used to, but it seems like it would work really well even with like an Apple remote to play.
Yeah.
And another game that would be fun, maybe there are multiplayer modes, but it's another one of those puzzle games where even single player, you and Tina could be playing it, and Tina could say, hey, try that. Whoever's holding the remote, the other person could say, hey, try this, or put that there. And it's another one of those like bleep bloop type of, couch co-op pseudo, multiplayer games.
Yep.
But yeah, I thought that was really cool that like they not only were they going after like Sega developers to, release stuff, but they were like, oh, let's get Sokpop to release a game. Like I was really shocked. Cool like I'm surprised they were like going that deep of cuts,
Right.
And it definitely feels a little bit more like sterile, for lack of a better word, than a Sokpop game traditionally does. Like they're a little bit more, just inventive or quirky or charming or whatever in a lot of ways sometimes. But this is just perfect, like low key, nothing, not breaking the mold, but still doing something fresh. There's like these little shape geometric characters that walk around. Like in the tutorial, it just says like, hey, these are like the little, I forget what they're called, like wordlings or something. It's like, they don't really do anything. They just walk around and make faces. So like they just ignore them, but they just walk around the map and make little faces. Like at first I thought maybe you had to, they were your characters or something that you play as, but
I don't know, spice.
Just a really cool, seems like a perfect Apple Arcade type game. So I don't know. Do you see yourself, I know you're just kind of dabbling, but do you see yourself going, hey, this is a cool trial period? Or do you see yourself saying, hey, I'm definitely going to keep this rolling, after the 3 months is up?
Hard to say. Yeah, I don't know. Because, I will say, like, Tina's very into Pocket Card Jockey right now. She's like, yeah, like this has caught her in a like DS sort of way. So, that could be a factor there too. And I know it's not like tremendously expensive to keep the subscription.
Yeah, I think it's only like $5 a month.
Yeah, I think it's still like
it's
$5,
on the cheap side.
It's not too bad. But we'll see. Yeah, like I'll probably dabble in it for maybe a couple extra months just beyond that, just to see what they could keep releasing. Because the subscription approach is kind of interesting, I think, for that sort of stuff, like Game Pass, just to see what comes available on that, and in that sort of format where it's you kind of have like more of the touch screen or just kind of easy to jump into stuff as opposed to the long form stuff you're getting on Xbox. So it's got its purpose there
getting
too,
a lot
right?
More truly arcadey stuff,
Right.
It's probably no pun. Like they didn't just pick Apple Arcade because it sounded good. That you are probably getting more arcadey.
Oh yeah.
Packages. So
like they've
cool.
got I even dabbled in, I didn't talk about it, but I even dabbled in, there's like an NBA 2K arcade edition thing that's
okay, nice.
That skews a little bit more towards like an NBA Jam sort of experience, but with NBA 2K. So it kind of melds that into like a more, friendly, easy to jump into approach for like a basketball game. And that's, that's fine for what it is too. So there's that sort of stuff. So it's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely like, if I have an Apple TV down the road or get a newer Mac or something or have an iPad, it's definitely like, Apple Arcade is definitely something. Like, I can't quite justify it just with my iPhone, but like if I had a little more means to play games beyond that, I'd be like, I'd $5 a month or 10 even, I'd probably consider it. So
particularly the iPad, I think it's a very good match for the iPad. But yeah, even with the Apple TV and a controller, like Sayonara Wild Hearts, once I got that HDMI thing figured out, was played just as seamlessly there as it would on Switch or Xbox.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's kind of crazy to think that technology has come that far.
I know.
But awesome that it has in a lot of regards. So.
For sure.
Yeah. And speaking of technology, I guess sort of retro technology, I know you've been talking quite a bit about the Analogue Pocket lately, or I shouldn't say quite a bit, but it's been coming up, and I know you've been breaking it out as of late, playing some more retro handheld stuff.
I know, and I was kind of like nitpicking on the Analogue Pocket, but of course we nitpick the things we love, right?
I was just saying, I was like, what, we're bound to, like, if we're gonna talk about Mario, I was like, we're bound to just like nitpick it to whenever I'm editing. I'm like, God, we just took a big shit on that game, and we all liked it, I think. So
that's just kind of what happens sometimes. But I was nitpicking the Analogue Pocket the last episode a decent amount with specifically like the weight disbursement stuff. But at that point, I was playing a lot of I was playing the Metroid games, just kind of like longer experiences, longer form stuff. And instead of what I think it might have been more designed for, which is, very short burst pick up and play original Game Boy Color, Game Gear sort of experiences, 30 minutes or less sort of things, right? It could fit this in between your commute or between your meeting or in your lunch break or whatever, at the end of the night before you go to sleep, whatever it might be, right? On the toilet, even, whatever it ends up looking like, you're playing a portable.
Whatever you can squeeze in some time,
yeah. So basically from playing, the Zero Mission and some other things on the Analogue Pocket, I'm like, okay. Let me go back, and especially because the screen aspect ratio is so perfect for Game Boy and Game Boy Color in particular. Oh my God, it's just so gorgeous to play those games in a way that it never quite was before. Right. Like, okay, I owe it to myself to throw another thing on there. And I think we were taking like a small trip to a cabin. I'm like, that's always when I do best, playing just these portable things, because there's nothing else to distract me, right? Yeah. So I'm like, okay, let's bring another thing besides just Metroid Zero Mission if I want to switch it up, or like it's too frustrating of a segment for me to play when I'm not rested or whatever. Let's pull out something that's just like a little bit more laid back too. And so I grabbed Mario Golf for Game Boy Color, which is, a game that I've owned for a long time, but never really put much time into. And although I've always been a fan of even the very retro sports games, as I've mentioned on the podcast before, like even just like the original tennis on Game Boy. I played a crap ton of, like, and it's pretty rudimentary when it is compared to anything relatively modern over the last 20 or 30 years. But
right.
Same with this Game Boy Color Mario Golf, but that was a very, pretty late for that sort of era. It was a 1999 release.
Oh, dang.
So
because it is a good looking game. I fired this up
Yeah.
for a little bit as well, and I was curious. I'm glad you're talking about the screen right away, because I was playing on an emulator.
Yeah.
And right away, because it's just bright on my computer screen, I was like, man, these colors just
Yeah.
really pop on this game.
I know. I
So I'm
love
sure
the
it
Game
looked
Boy
great
Color.
on the Pocket.
The Game
Yeah.
Boy Color palette is
Yes.
very satisfying.
It's so it can either be like really crisp and like bright and bold, but there's
Yeah.
also like that soft like pastel look that some games have too. That
Well, you got to
just so
think
good. This one's a little bolder, but
Yeah.
I love the colors.
that was the true, like, last time we were getting major production value 8-bit games. Really,
Yeah,
was
that's
then.
a good point. Yeah,
And in like over a decade after the consoles were doing that in, as the major platform, considering, the Sega Genesis originally came out in 1989 and that was a 16-bit system, right? So
right.
like,
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. Yeah,
in 1999 they were still releasing 8-bit games. They just happened to be portable. So which was awesome for people like me. So you decided to bring along Mario Golf, having heard all the time, like, oh, these Mario Golf games, it's not just a straight game of golf like from NES. It's got these little RPG elements where you can add experience, and there's a sense of progression to it or whatever. It's not just play this course, then play this course and try to beat your previous par or whatever. Okay, cool. Brought it with me, popped it in. And yeah, it is that, you still need to have some affinity for that sort of like 8-bit styled golf game. There's certainly going to be some people who are like, ooh, this might be a little too archaic for me to get into. And even for me,
it's on the line. It's on the line.
It is, because,
it is better. It is, but like having played a little bit of like NES Open over at my cousin's growing up as a kid, like it's not that janky. It's
Not
definitely
quite.
like it is that exact same style of gameplay in game pretty much.
Yes.
But it just feels much smoother, especially if you're familiar with like the N64 Mario Golf or really any of the games in the series. It like the shot meter looks really similar.
Yes.
Like, I was like, oh, I feel right at home when I booted this up.
Yes, which, funny enough, in looking this up prior to knowing that I'd talk about it on the podcast, I looked it up and like, oh, actually, the Mario Golf on Game Boy Color released after the N64 game.
I was wondering,
release.
I was like, was this the first one or was it the later in the series? Yeah,
It was like 4 months afterwards, and they specifically apparently also built in like functionality where if you use the N64 transfer pack that would go into the controller that was primarily used with the Pokemon stuff.
Pokemon Stadium and stuff.
Yeah, that you could use that to do a kind of a back and forth transfer and like unlock characters from the N64 game apparently that you could do in the Game Boy Color. So I'm like, oh shoot, I'm gonna have to figure out a way to. I don't think I have a transfer pack, but I'll grab one at some point just to check out some of those things. I'm such a sucker for that sort of very niche.
Like, if you own these two things and you connect them together with the, Game Boy Advance cable, you get an extra thing.
Yes, I will happily waste my time to do those sort of things every time. I don't know why. I'm just always fascinated by that sort of stuff. But
no, I feel you.
Almost bought a Neo Geo Pocket Color to do that with Dreamcast, but didn't quite go that far. But
tempting though.
But yeah, so off that tangent, was playing this Mario Golf Game Boy Color, and I've been really sucked into it. I put actually a lot of time into it. For whatever reason, it sucked me in, and you do gain levels, and then you can add to your drive, the length of your drive, the power of your drive, or how much your draw or fade is on your shots for the accuracy of where you want to hit your the ball versus where you think it's going to go, and how high or low so you can cut through the wind effectively, and the wind conditions are often very extreme on the courses.
Like pushing 20 miles per hour on like the first hole I played. I was like, Jesus, man. Now I didn't jump into the campaign. I don't know. I must have just like jumped into like a basic stroke play. Yeah, I was just able to jump in. There's like 4 courses, and I was just like, I didn't even know. I even thought like, oh, they must have only added that stuff in Advanced Tour. I was thinking they must have not added that RPG stuff in the Game Boy Color. So that's cool to know that almost has me even more intrigued, because I had kind of a similar experience. Like, even though I just kind of was like, oh, Randall's going to talk about it, I'm going to fire it up on the emulator just to, I don't think I've ever played it, and refresh my memory, see what it's like, whatever. And I ended up like getting sucked in. I kept like quitting it. And I think I mentioned before we started recording, I was having like audio delay issues. So I kept closing it down, but then I'd be like, let me check again and play 4 or 5 more holes. And I just kept kind of playing it. I don't know. I played it for like an hour on and off today.
Oh, yeah.
Even though I was really just kind of booting it up for the heck of it. But I don't know. I played like a little bit of all the 4 courses that I don't know if you can unlock more, but
I don't either. I'm on the
there's
third
even like
course.
a Zelda themed course, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like Hyrule, at least like the little flag logo looks Zelda-esque.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was really impressed. I was kind of, especially after being so disappointed in Super Rush. I'm like, oh man, maybe this is my fresh Mario Golf fix that I needed.
Right? I know. And I'm like, oh shoot. Like, and it's probably, I didn't realize, we had talked about this a little bit before. I thought that I had owned already the Game Boy Advance Mario Golf, but I didn't. It's just something I thought I had, but it is not in my collection.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I probably would have jumped over to that because I was having such a good time with this. And like, oh, I know they went even further with the RPG elements in that one. Might as well like, play the 16/32-bit version of that, which is, probably has the ability to, upgrade your equipment, which you can't do in this version. Things like that are, it's still, they kind of still kept it relatively simple and accessible, which has in some way has its benefit too, right? For the I just want to play this for 20 or 30 minutes and like whatever, turn my brain off and just like hit the timing on the shot right, and just that basic gameplay loop of like hit this line on this line and this line on this line in succession with aiming your shot is like I don't know, it just never gets old. It's always a good mechanic.
Yeah, and somehow they really made that like overhead. Like that's really what the disconnect for me was playing like NES Open, that kind of like overhead. You're kind of like just looking at like an aerial view of the hole that you're playing. Yeah. But something about the way they like did the cameras and the way they kind of have everything textured with the pixel art and the greens, like the arrows pointing which way.
Right.
That was really the only thing that I thought was kind of awkward was the putting. Like
hard to get used to on the putting.
It's like, man, they don't really like zoom in and give you like a good angle of like looking at the slope. You just got to really learn like what do those arrows mean and how much are they going to push.
And you learn the hard way.
Yeah, exactly. I was triple bogeying like crazy.
Oh yes,
but it's like I don't know. I really love how like when you're putting, it might only be when you're putting for like birdie or eagle, or like a good putt, a good opportunity, but it like kind of plays like the underground Mario music.
Oh yeah,
like and it kind of gets like intense. Like, oh, you got to make this putt. Like,
oh yeah, and it does kind of a remix theme of it too, which is pretty cool.
The music was really really cool. That was really what was like. I kept like turning. Normally when I'm like playing up in my room, I'm just kind of like, oh, let me turn this down. I don't want the especially those 8-bit emulator, like through the emulator through my laptop. It just can be really crunchy and like almost grating at times, but. I was like, man, I'm just jamming out. I know. The music's great. Love how the colors popped. I didn't have really anybody unlocked. I just was kind of, again, just went right to that stroke play and just played as Mario. Yeah. And just like, kind of crazy. Luigi's max drive to start is 220. Mario is 270. It's like, oh my God.
270?
I believe so. Maybe it was 250.
Man, I just did the created character through the RPG, and the starting like drive they gave you, I think, is like 202 or something like that.
Oh,
and
man.
You have to work your way up. I think I'm now up to like 222 or something. So 270 is ungodly.
I'm going to have to check out that mode because I really, in all the other Mario Golf games, I really got sucked into just whether it was campaign or just playing like tournaments through all the courses. Like I really wanted to have that experience with Super Rush, and now I'm just like, hey, here's 4 new courses for me to play, and it's a little janky and retro, but I can get used to it, and the music's good. And so it's a really cool game, and it actually made me boot up because I had the emulator up and running. I was like, you know what? I don't think I've ever played the Game Boy Color Mario Tennis either.
I haven't either, and I don't own that, and I'm very curious about it now.
It plays great. I mean, I just played a quick exhibition, not even a full. I played maybe 4 or 5 points because I was just like, oh, I'm almost done. But it's literally right next to it on my list of games here. And I fired it up, and it's like, again, it's got really bright, crisp pixels, but like the 3D like depth, like I mean, I pretty much felt like, oh, I'm playing Mario Tennis on 64. I mean, it's obviously looks different, it has a lot of, but it didn't. I mean, it still had the like you hold down to charge a shot, and then like you get backspin with the one button, top spin with the other button, a power shot if you hit both at the same time. It still had a moment where like I barely made it to a ball, so I like popped it up so DK could smash it on me. Like it had the like little like rotating star on the ground. I was like, man, this kind of feels like the same game. It's actually almost more impressive than the 64 version.
Right.
Because like how did they the 3D depth feels like spot on. But I guess, you were talking about tennis, original tennis on Game Boy.
Which is phenomenal. So it wouldn't surprise me if they just built on that engine, to be honest with you, if that's what.
Yeah, and then there's Super Tennis as well on Super Nintendo. That's another great one too.
Fantastic.
So I mean, Nintendo knows how to make tennis games. They know how to make their sports games in all reality.
Really do.
I mean, it's almost a shame that they kind of like all became Mario sports games, because like I wouldn't mind seeing like a just a regular Nintendo arcadey hockey game, or you know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to be Mario per se. So
and Camelot was involved with these early golf and
both
tennis
of
games,
those,
and they're just they knew what the hell they were doing. You can
tell they definitely know how to make a sports game, I guess, but but with a little more to it, I guess.
Yes, in a with that Nintendo little spin
and the Mario like worlds, and I don't know, it just felt so cool because like that was kind of what Super Rush was lacking. It was like, oh, this feels like it's just regular golf courses, and like even the ones that did kind of feel like regular golf courses on this Mario Golf on Game Boy Color, it's like they still just like. Maybe it's just the colors of them or something. They just feel more alive and vibrant than anything in the new game.
Yeah.
So it kind of like, I don't know.
There's a challenge there too. Like, but I never felt like, oh, the game screwed me out of something. I'm like, I just need to pay more attention. Like, I just need to think about this a little bit more.
Yeah, and I honestly like I'm mad because like again while I was playing it and having the audio like lag issues and the like, input lag potentially, and I'm like overthinking it while I'm on an emulator. It's like part of me is like, man, I wish I was just playing on the Analogue Pocket, so I just know, or even on just regular hardware, but just like I know it's working the way it's supposed to. But again, I don't even remember if I own either or both of those games off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure I do, but all my cartridges and stuff are packed up, so I'm not sure. But I know I had never played tennis before this moment. So
very cool. I need to get that. One way or another, I'm going to grab that game this year.
Hey, maybe while you're in town in Michigan we're doing some video game hunting. I feel like those are bound to pop up in the wild a little more regularly and not so exorbitantly priced. So
definitely. Maybe
we'll get lucky. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that Michigan trip.
Yeah, me too. It'll be awesome.
Yeah, it's been way too long.
Yeah.
Way too long.
Seriously.
Yeah.
You used to do that all the time.
Yeah, on the regular. So yeah, it'll be kind of nice to like kind of round out those collections a little bit with some of the games that maybe we thought we had all along, and just like, oh man, I guess I didn't have that Mario game.
Oh, it's like I should have grabbed that before. Oh well.
Yeah, before it was $25 or more. It just seems like I can't imagine those games. I feel like there's still a reasonable price, but I shouldn't speak too soon.
I would think so, given the number of copies. But yeah, who knows these days?
Yeah. Retro scene's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, any more handheld stuff or retro stuff, or
no?
Save
it just
it for next week.
It just rekindled my love with the Analogue Pockets, like sleep and like awake and now save state functionality too. It's just like that stuff's just so crazy accessible to me now, even more than before. So you'll probably hear me talk about more portable stuff for a little while here, just because of that, one way or the other.
I'm happy to hear that, because keep that train rolling, because it does, like, I don't know, I kind of forget about the handhelds from time to time. Like, again, when I first moved back, and then I was kind of on that little 3DS kick for a second, I was like, man, I forgot about these games, and I'm already off that kick again. So it's like, man, I think if I had a brand new system like the Analogue Pocket, I'd probably be more like, it'd be calling my name, like, hey, you haven't played that new system yet.
Dust off that Game Boy Advance at least.
For real, that perfect form factor.
Yes, sir.
But yeah, I think we can probably wrap up the chit chat there this week, unless we got more retro stuff to talk about. But yeah, we'll save it for next time.
There's always
more handheld, more retro, more indie. Because I played a bunch of Ludum Dare Jam games on a stream the other day. I've been playing all sorts of games all over the map, so I'll save those for another time. And we'll save some more Metroid stuff for when John's back around. And until next week, you can catch us on the internet at pursuingpixels.com and everywhere else pretty much. And otherwise, we'll catch you next week, which I already said, and take care, and we'll catch you then.
Bye-bye. Turn the noisemaker on high for sleep
my
time.
parents, they blast their noisemaker. It's crap. I'm like, man, if somebody broke into your guy's house, you have no clue.
We put we got the box fan on high. We've been living that life for years and years.
I feel that. I used to always put like music on or a podcast or something.
Yeah.
Podcast now I get like too invested. I'm like,
that
I
would
can't
not
go to
work
sleep
for me.
Yeah.
That would not
and then
work for
growing
me.
up, it was always like Cartoon Network, like even pre like Adult Swim. It was like, when they would just show like Hanna-Barbera cartoons, like
Sure.
Jetsons.
I could
and
fall asleep to
Scooby-Doo.
some of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, just like, okay, this is like I've seen them a million times.
Yeah.
Tom and Jerry. It's like literally every episode's basically the same plot.
Yeah.
I'm just
not
kind
a
of
lot
along
to
for
that
the
sort of
ride.
stuff sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like kind of just mindless comfort.
Yep.
It's almost at this point, it's like kind of like there's more to a Seinfeld episode, but it's kind of like, okay, I know those. It's just kind of like it's not something new. I'm just putting something on. I already know all that what happens. I can just kind of passively watch this.
Yep.
Or even Friends, which I know a little bit less, but I'm just like, I don't really care if I miss some of it, but
Yep.
it's still kind of funny,
Yep.
It's actually, Friends is actually funnier than I ever gave it credit for.
Really?
Yeah, like it's one of those shows that's always like they just show like 8 episodes in a row at night or something.
Sure.
And I'm like, this is pretty good. So
That's one I never
laughed quite a bit.
really tuned into as much.
Yeah, I
in
never
those
watched
days.
it at the time ever. It was just kind of like, like my mom and sister would watch it sometimes,
Yeah.
and then I'd be like when I would come home for the holidays, I always have it just marathons on.
Of
I'm
course.
like, man, everybody usually gets a couple good zingers in every episode. Like, it's like, it's not like totally dated, and
Sure.
it is in some ways. But
I'm sure. Yeah, considering the time period. Yeah.
yeah, it definitely has those moments. But
Yeah.
for the most part, I'm like, man, this is actually decently funny.
That's funny.